Welcome everyone back to the Aura podcast. Today we have a special guest. We have Kyle. How are you doing, Kyle?
Good, yourself?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you coming in today. I'm really excited to have you on today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So just kind of before we start, for people who kind of don't know you, could you kind of maybe tell a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and maybe what you're studying?
Yeah, I'm originally from Timmins. I'm studying English with a French minor, and I'm on the wrestling team here at Algoma.
Awesome. Are you in your second or third year? Or?
That's a complicated question. Officially be like my third year.
Third year.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, obviously, from Timmins, what kind of made you come to Algoma University? Because I was doing a little bit of research and I saw you were at Concordia, I'm pretty sure, before. Yeah. So, what kind of made the shift?
So initially out of high school, I went to Concordia in Montreal. Mm-hmm. It was a good school, didn't have too many complaints there, but I wasn't liking the programs and how the classes ran. Mm-hmm. Then I took a year off. I was coaching high school wrestling, and then met Trevor Manchester, the coach here, and he talked me into come checking out the university and went back to school.
Did you, kind of a side question to Concordia and that kind of university, was all the classes kind of in French or
No, it was all English school.
Oh, okay.
It was really every class was just an auditorium of 500 plus people.
Oh, okay. So you kind of, I would say, did you kind of benefit from coming here with the smaller class sizes?
Yeah.
And kind of one-on-one with everyone?
Yeah. It's you can actually say something in your classroom before it's you're 400 people sitting in front of you. No, it's you're not really going to say very much.
No, I know what you mean. And then coming to Algoma, why did you choose to kind of study English and eventually do that minor in French?
Well, I was looking at being a teacher. So I was looking at the math route and then struggling academically and didn't really love the program itself. Mm-hmm. I just figured I'll try something else, and it's been pretty accommodating so far. So
that's awesome. And then obviously what I'm really interested in about, because also I'm very interested in sports and athletics and stuff, and I'm really interested in your wrestling background. Obviously I was been following a lot this year because I have a good friend, Andrea, who she was on the wrestling team, and she kind of kept me up to date with everything, and I started really getting more involved in it and watching it. And you found a lot of success this year. From what I've seen, maybe on a personal, it could be different, but from what I've seen and what the school's kind of shown, and even watching, I would say I was really impressed. I really enjoyed watching you wrestle this year. And I think the first question is about your wrestling careers. Obviously, you wrestled in 2019 here at the school, and then you kind of took a bit of a 2-year kind of break. I'm kind of wondering why did you take that break?
I did my first semester of online after the pandemic and really disliked it. And then I pretty well just dropped out, started working in the mines back home.
Oh, so you went back to Timmins?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then after that, got into doing jiu-jitsu and stuff over there. That was the only thing in the smaller towns. There's not as much stuff to do.
Yeah.
And then just last fall, did a jiu-jitsu competition, won the jiu-jitsu competition. And the next day there was a wrestling tournament. At that point I wasn't wrestling. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, that's it. I messaged the coach. They let me just float in for a tournament.
Yeah.
And I got whooped. And I'm like, freaking won the jiu-jitsu tournament, go to wrestling, get my ass whooped. I'm like, that's it. I can't let it end like that. So then I just changed gears, went back to wrestling. And really just that loss pushed me to come back to school, go back to wrestling, and had a good season.
And then obviously, when you came back, you competed at I believe it's the Brock Open, where you went 3-0. How did you were you kind of nervous going into that Open?
Yeah,
kind of think it was all going to go downhill.
Yeah,
how did you kind of push yourself to go 3-0 at that Open?
The first match was, I knew it was going to be the biggest match of the day. It was the Brock guy. Then the other two were Toronto. They have not as good a wrestling team as a lot of the upper university, so I wasn't too worried about those. And that one was actually came out by the skin of my teeth. There was got thrown twice in the first 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. There's a mercy rule where if the guy gets more than 10 points than you, they just kind of end it. So with those two throws, he had it 8-0 within the first 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
then I just kind of had to smarten up and reassess what I was doing there, and I managed to come out on top. But it was really just that first match had me a little worried and stressed.
So I'm assuming after that win, kind of like all that momentum.
Yeah, after that, because that was so my first match coming back to university in January was against the guy who was ranked number 2 in Canada. Oh, wow. After I got that win, I felt a lot more confident for how the season was going to go.
Was your kind of like, did you kind of feel kind of unconditioned or kind of like, well, this is...
Absolutely. Before, my strategy was always try to push everything for time and not kind of overgo for points or try to rush it.
Yeah.
Where I definitely felt I had to try to rush things a lot more than like I was typically comfortable with, just because the conditioning was lacking. And then that was, just moved back to the Sioux in January, started training. So it was really a big push to try to get my conditioning back up to par for nationals.
And then, one thing I'm curious about is like, you say you went like, you were kind of like 0-8 in that kind of a round, right? How do you kind of like, shift a gear and like eventually win? Because you're basically 2 points off of getting Mercy Road.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot probably going through your mind about that.
Yeah, it's definitely like a big mental game where a lot of people get discouraged in that. I strive on it. It's bad, but I let that happen way too often. And then I really think I do better under that pressure. Okay, now there's no room for any mistakes. I have to go. Kind of pushes me to be more aggressive, which typically a bit out of my style, but I mean, it works well when I do it.
And then obviously, you go 3-0, and then eventually you go, I believe at the end of January it was 7-0, and then you're going to the OUA Championships. How was that going? How was that experience going to the OUA Championship? Did you kind of feel a little bit nervous, or did all that momentum kind of make it easier going into the championship?
It's pretty split down the middle. Like I definitely had my confidence of being undefeated going in OUAs.
Yeah.
But there's always that thought in the back of my head where I haven't trained for the last 2 years. I've only been back at it for a couple months. Yeah. Like, this is OUA, But managed to stay on top and ended up wrestling that same guy that almost beat me my first match of the season.
Okay.
Hadn't competed against him since, and then it was a completely different match there, walk through.
So did you have to, another kind of side question with the OUA Championship, like how does that kind of work? Like is it a set of matches that you have to win, or like how does that kind of work to get to that final?
Yeah, so it's kind of, OUAs is just like your standard brackets kind of set up. But they do follow seeding for that. Okay. So based on how you did throughout the year, you get different ranks. So like there, I was ranked second going in.
Okay.
And then I was third in USports at that point. And then, but then for USports, they don't use the ranking. It's just kind of a random draw.
Okay. And then obviously I'm really interested in that gold medal match because I was watching it live with Andrea, and she was like, she was just going crazy. I was like, what are you going, like, what's going on? And we had the match on, and I didn't know what was really going on at first. But then she was, telling me about the guy you were facing against. You had a good history, a good background, and obviously you coming back from a long break. It was really impressive because I believe you won 8-1. Yeah. And kind of like how was that match? Was that one of your? Would you say it's one of a memorable match? Or?
Yeah, definitely. It was probably that one, and then my finals at USports were definitely my two biggest matches. But that one, I really liked it because it showed like the progression from the start of the season at the Brock Open versus there it was a repeat match. Went from him walking through me and me struggling to come back to me just controlling it the whole time. Points came hard at the start, but then the second I got that first takedown and I had the lead, I was pretty confident I was going to have it. It's, once I'm ahead, I'm pretty confident I can keep those points up. Like I'm strong, I'm confident in my defense, but offensively, initially getting those points, that's typically where I struggle a bit more.
Yeah, do you, obviously, like, this... Obviously, at the end of the match, like I saw, that guy looked really, he just looked really upset. You know what I mean? I don't even think he shook your hand or anything.
No.
Like you kind of like going into these like these matches, like especially a gold medal match. Do you kind of tend to stay a little bit more humble or grounded, or do you kind of like have to have a little bit of that kind of cockiness or a little bit of that confidence to kind of go up against a guy like this who, I believe he was on Broad. They've won like the last 5 or 6 championships as a team. Yeah. So, obviously he has a lot of hype and momentum coming in. And I think one thing about like, going to this school, especially in athletics, is I think Algoma is a really big underdog. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of universities kind of count us out as a school. And I think, you winning the gold match I feel like it kind of put Algoma on the map a little bit. So, how do you feel going into that match? Like
I was always told you got to be cocky, confident. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be like too confident, where then like you don't want to underestimate your opponent. Like there's a reason they're there in that match. Yeah. And especially after the last time I won against them, we're very close to losing. Mm-hmm. It was just being more aware of, okay, this is the high caliber athlete. You got to be smart with every move you make. There's no room for mistakes. And then as far as that, I'd say typically wrestling in general is really humble. Mm-hmm. Where even if you don't want to, you shake the guy's hand at the end of the match. You go to your corner. If you're upset, you take it off the mat. You don't show it on the mat. Yeah. I find it's really good for that. Mm-hmm. You do have the odd people who do celebrate on the mat. Yeah. And I take that almost as an insult to the sport.
Okay.
Where
that's interesting.
It's like, it's a very different sport where like you don't like if I was to celebrate and do a backflip after a match, like you'd be getting in shit. Everyone would talk about it. It's like it's an insult to do that celebration almost.
Oh, so you kind of keep that stuff.
Step off the mat. Yeah. Then you do your celebration.
And then after that championship, coming back, how did you kind of prepare for USports? Were you still were you nervous, or how was that experience going to the USports?
Yeah. It was stressful, especially after leaving OUAs, right? A lot of the team was injured and wasn't able to keep training at that point. Yeah. So it was definitely a little stressful for me trying to keep training with everyone else being injured. But it was just, again, keep your eye on the prize, work on your techniques just day by day, repetitions.
Did you won bronze at USports, which is a big accomplishment, but did you kind of feel like you fell short, or were you still kind of proud of getting that gold? Because obviously, again, you took the 2 years off, but then you kind of shifted into you shifted to go into OUAs, and you won the whole thing, right? Yeah. So, did you still kind of feel, a little bit disappointed that you didn't get the gold, or did you still kind of feel proud for what you accomplished? Yeah,
I was disappointed, but I think I underestimated myself a bit going in. Oh, okay. Where that thought in my head of like, I've been gone for so long kind of held me back. Yeah. Like the one match I did lose was against last year's Pan American champion. Oh, wow. And I knew that going in, which was kind of in my head, and we ended up having like a really close match. It ended 5-0 overtime. Oh, okay. And I had a lot of scoring opportunities where it was just, I was moving slow, like you can tell I wasn't confident. Mm-hmm. Where I think restarting, I definitely could have gave him a bit more of a run for his money. Mm-hmm. And had I done that, it would have put me in a gold medal match instead of the bronze medal match.
Which, and then going into that bronze medal match, how was that?
It was good. I didn't really know the opponent because he was from Saskatchewan. Yeah. So it was really going against an unknown guy who's undefeated as far as I know. I don't know anything about him. Yeah. So it's a bit of a different mental game. Also not experiencing a match with him throughout the season, you don't know what to expect, which is a big thing. Like it's an advantage knowing how your opponent's going to react when you put pressure on them. Yeah. So there I definitely felt overwhelmed at the start. Same kind of thing where he had me 9-0. Oh, you were down 9-0. Wow. So, and then kicking into gear, striving under pressure, and ended up getting a pin in that one.
And then, another question like about the opponents and stuff, because I know for me, whenever our teams, like the soccer team, whenever we're trying to like figure out teams, you kind of research them, or maybe try to see what their tendencies are? Do you do the same when you're coming up against certain opponents? Like, do you try to figure out their tendencies the night before? Or how do you kind of prepare for that?
Yeah, so a lot of people do. I tend not to. Well, there's two things that happen. The first is you don't necessarily know who you're going against. Most tournaments, you don't know till the day of what your bracket's going to be. And then even at that point, you get your bracket, then it's depending who wins and who loses where. You don't know who you're up against.
Oh, okay.
And if you can't study everyone in your weight class. That's kind of it. But then, like, you typically know who your top guys are. And there's definitely the top guys, there's always matches on YouTube and stuff you can look at. But a lot of the times I find that just kind of gets in your head where you're like, okay, you know what, this is that guy at the Pan American Champions in the gold medal match. Well, me watching that, like, I didn't, but had I watched that, probably wouldn't make me feel more confident for going to fight him, right? So I try to avoid, just take them, try to imagine it's Joe Blow off the street and do the best you can.
No, exactly. I think that's a good way of thinking too, kind of treating everyone maybe like kind of equal. You know, no one's better than anyone else.
Try to avoid putting someone on a pedestal that
exactly. And I think, especially with like an individual sport like wrestling and other individual sports, I think it's a real mental game, right? Because it's like it's just you and yourself in there. And obviously you do have your coaches and everything, but I think it's really yourself. Where you look at the team sports, you have guys who can maybe put on a master class and win you the game, but I feel like for you guys in the wrestling, I feel like it's all mental. You know what I mean? Like, how long is usually a match? Like 8 minutes, 10?
No, it's pretty short actually.
Oh, okay.
It sounds short, but it's not.
But
it's
I think it
2 3-minute rounds.
Okay.
It feels
it must
so
feel
long.
like
because it's like most other sports, it's you have a break. You know, like you pass the ball and then you have a second to move and adjust, take a breather.
Yeah.
Where there, it's like.
You don't really have that time.
3 minutes of just locked in fighting, and you don't really get a pause anywhere for that. So it's just 3 minutes exertion, 30-second break, 3-minute exertion.
Does your coach usually talk to you a lot during the matches?
During, typically not. Okay. The odd thing, like if you're trying to set something up and it's just not working, he might kind of tell you like, do something else, look for this, just kind of like 2-word responses, kind of what to go for. So the big thing would be in between rounds, your 30 seconds. Then he's got a chance to actually kind of say something. For the most part, you tend not to hear them when because you're so invested in that fight that someone talking 20 feet beside you don't hear them. Right? Yeah,
so it's really just yourself.
Yeah, it's count on your training. Smarten up and do better.
And then, so obviously now that you kind of accomplished all this year, what's kind of the goal for, I believe you will be competing next year, or so what's kind of the goal moving forward next year? Is it to get that gold in USports, or because now I feel like you've accomplished so much that you kind of set a high expectation for yourself, and it's sometimes a curse and a blessing because you hold yourself to that such high pedestal of accomplishing so much. And I guess the only downfall is people kind of expect you to meet those expectations. So what is the expectation for next year?
Definitely want to get my rematch in with the guy that beat me at USports. We're talking with my coach. We're looking at doing a bit of international tournaments. Just get some different competition in. And then definitely going for OUAs isn't really the roadblock there. It's really USports is the goal. And then bring home the goal. And then
so after you graduate and do you still want to pursue anything? Do you still want to compete in wrestling, or do you want to do anything around wrestling? Or what's that kind of looking after you're done competing from the university level?
I definitely don't see myself leaving the sport. Where I'm at, I'm doing teachers college as well afterwards, so I still got another 3 years.
Some more years.
So I can also compete while I'm doing that. And then past that, probably try to get a coaching somewhere. If it's through university or just high school, time will tell. So
you just want to stay as close as you can to wrestling.
Yeah.
And then obviously you talked about going to teachers college and eventually becoming a teacher. What kind of made you make that decision as like a career choice?
I've always kind of wanted to since like early high school. I had my wrestling coach back then was one of my teachers, and he was like a big influence on me. Like getting through high school, I started in like the lower courses, and he got me to move from like the college courses to pre-university to try to, which is a big jump to make. And I ended up getting into university pretty well all through wrestling. Even that, like my academics weren't great, where that was really swayed me in initially getting into Concordia in Montreal. And then it's just afforded me a lot of good opportunities and life experiences that if you can pass that on to someone else, why not?
And then kind of going back just a little bit to that wrestling, I kind of noticed, like, obviously, like, growing up, I didn't really, like, know a lot of people that wrestled. Do you kind of think that wrestling is, like, a sport that is, it can still do a lot more growing, or do you think it's just not really looked at as much compared to other sports?
It's been on a decline, especially with the pandemic and stuff. And the sport's definitely struggling a little bit in Canada. But it depends where you go. Like if you're going like Iran and different places like that, US, like it's huge. Then like when I was in high school, at the time everyone was like wrestling was huge. And it was like I had 2 older brothers, bunch of cousins. It was like our whole family was in it, and we were a team of like 30 people, just in like a small town like Timmins. That's just the one high school. Whereas now, like I feel like it's definitely had a decline. I think it'll just take a couple years for it to come back, especially the pandemic and being that close to people kind of put a wedge in it.
During that pandemic too, did you completely like stop training, or did you just kind of train and work, or how was that kind of
so I couldn't do any wrestling. So it was actually quite frustrating. There was places like Montreal, they're considered Olympic training center, and because they do international tournaments, they didn't have to stop the whole pandemic.
Okay.
Where because they're the high level like training facility. They were exempt from a lot of the lockdowns. Whereas us, like, if we wanted to get together and do a practice, that was illegal. Right? So you didn't really have a choice.
Exactly.
You try to do what you can to stay fit, but it's nothing compared to the technical side of wrestling that you need.
And with also wrestling, you also said you liked you did a little bit of jiu-jitsu, and I'm a pretty big fan of like MMA and jiu-jitsu. So I'm kind of interested in how you kind of got into jiu-jitsu and how you found that.
So that I was actually working at a mine in Kirkland Lake. So that's a smaller town than Timmins, just outside of it, a couple hours. There's really one gym there. There was like karate and jiu-jitsu. It's pretty well all there was for that. I would have wanted to do wrestling, but it wasn't an option. So after I didn't do it for like the first year, but after a year not doing anything, it was just nice to get back to doing some grappling and moving around.
Do you think you'd want to do more jiu-jitsu, after, or do you think you just want to stick to wrestling? Because it's a really hard sport.
I probably will. Wrestling is so much more physical on your body, where like I felt like I could be slightly out of shape and still do really well in jiu-jitsu. Where it's just the flow of it is less aggressive on the body. Where in wrestling you definitely need like a lot more conditioning to be able to withstand.
Do you have to wake up when you do wrestling?
So I actually over the pandemic I'd put on quite a bit of weight. And then, so for my first competition back, the Brock Open, I had to lose almost 20 pounds.
How was that?
It's not fun. I don't recommend it.
Is it mostly just body weight, or do you actually have to lose a little bit of body fat or whatever?
So typically less than like 7 pounds for me. I'll usually just do water weight. More than that, I have to diet. So that one was like 2 weeks of dieting. And then I think I lost like a good 10 pounds in water weight the day of.
Are you just so like, because obviously like when I watch MMA fights and stuff like that,
Mm.
I like watching the fighters kind of like weight cut because a lot of people have different strategies and kind of like what they like to do. So how do you kind of feel like? Do you feel kind of just completely like dead, or is it after that weight cut?
Depends how much you're doing. Like just the water weight cut isn't horrible. The challenge is how long you have to stay on weight.
Okay.
Because it's like if you can do a water weight cut and then you make weight and then within half an hour you're weighed in and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
That's not bad at all. You're just dehydrated for a couple hours. You weigh in, then you drink water and you're fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you have to like get on that weight and then stay there for an extended period of time.
Oh, okay.
That adds a lot more
challenges. Have you ever missed weight before, or?
I've happily never missed weight. I know a lot of people who have.
What kind of happens when you miss weight when you're competing? Are you still allowed to compete, or
So it depends on the competition.
Okay.
If it's like a smaller competition, typically they'll let you just go the other weight class.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something like OUAs or USports, you don't make your weight, you're not competing.
Are you're disqualified?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So that was.
So it's.
So do you ever get kind of nervous when you're weighing in, or is it?
Yeah, a little bit, and then it's like, well, it's hard, especially like being from here. You know, you got to drive to Toronto for the weigh-in. Just as an example, you're really tempted to eat on that 8-hour drive. You know?
I know when we drive to the games, when we stop,
you just want to muck.
Yeah,
and it's like a mental fight to just I gotta watch what I'm eating, gotta stay on weight, and then thinking. Not just nutritionally about what you're eating, but the actual weight of the food. Because if it's going to be in your stomach when you're weighing in, you gotta watch that as well. And
then obviously, like when you're done your weight cutting, competing, like how's that relief? Like when you're all kind of finished, is it kind of like do you kind of maybe the next day or two kind of relax and just eat whatever you want, or is it back to just I have to keep training? Or like,
well, it's your so typically you'd weigh in and then like weigh in the evening, and compete the next morning. So it's really rehydrate yourself best you can, and then get some like good carbs in to get you through the next day. After the tournament, definitely eat slightly excessively. And then it's like, okay, there's another competition next week or in 2 weeks, and then you gotta start dieting again.
So it's a bit of
restart the cycle.
And then now it's the off season. Are you kind of taking it more easy, or are you still really trying to like improve on anything?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. So as far as like the nutrition side, I can be a bit more relaxed. I don't have to make weight, so I'm able to carry a bit more weight on. So it's really the time to kind of work on like your strength training. And building muscle, where during season, you don't want to be doing that in wrestling because then it's a little bit too much strain on your body. So you do it in the off season, your practices are a bit lighter, and then it just kind of helps your body develop without getting injured.
Yeah, is it more like in the off season, a little bit more like learning techniques and kind of sharpening up your skills, or do you kind of just try to push yourself even more?
I'd say it's more refining your skills during that. When you're like, that's what I struggled with coming back in January was I didn't really have time to try to like play with things and like just experiment with wrestling and try to like go to the gym and try to hit some PRs and stuff where there wasn't time. It was just wrestling conditioning. Just as much time on that as possible because that's your competition is just like doing cardio on a bike or a treadmill doesn't simulate a wrestling match. It's a completely different cardio.
Different cardio. Yeah, I've heard that.
So it's really during your season you just need as much of that specific training as you can.
And then kind of before we wrap up this interview, my last question is, what would you kind of say for people that want to get involved in wrestling and people, younger kids kind of coming into wrestling, and what's your kind of advice on that?
Absolutely do it. It's a great way to stay in shape. As far as that goes, so many opportunities out of it, especially when you're younger. I'd say especially right now with the decline in the sport, there's so many opportunities. Just coming out of high school, not only with like scholarship opportunities, but getting into schools.
Yeah.
Because you could be, you know what, they might want an 80 for you to get in and you have a 78 and they're not going to let you in.
Yeah.
And then if you have that sport behind you and you're doing well, a lot of the times they can kind of make that work. If it's with or without a scholarship, just kind of gives you a bit more push to getting into the schools you want to get into.
Do you think also, like another question is, do you think wrestling kind of helped your university kind of focus a little bit more on your studies because you kind of know I have to do well academically to kind of stay on my sport and compete?
Yeah, it definitely pushes you there. The other thing too is like dealing with stress, just having an outlet. Yeah. Like I was doing very well academically pre-pandemic. Pandemic hit, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of like it lost that de-stress factor. It definitely made it a lot more for me like difficult academically.
Yeah.
Just not having an outlet to vent, you know. So it's definitely, I recommend it to anyone who wants to try it out for sure.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate you coming on to the podcast and kind of talking about your whole wrestling experience this year and stuff like that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thanks, man.
Awesome.